Welcome. We're getting ready for Christmas here. There's a story I've told here before, and it's part of it. A couple years ago, I had this really impactful experience where I was teaching in Africa and Kenya and had a health issue, and I had to go to the ER. And it was a long story, but I had a bunch of medications that kind of conflicted with each other, and I collapsed during a teaching session. And so I went to the hospital, and there's all kinds of stuff that they don't tell you about in the tourist brochures when you go to a foreign country. You can get an EKG done. It's pretty great. Collecting them on every continent in the world. So I've got 2 down, so here we go. It's good. Got a blood test done. Put that all in my memory book, After all that was done, my body was just exhausted. And so the next day after being in the ER, I got on a plane and flew home. And it's like 18 hours of flying. And so I was flying by myself. And there are only so many 3-hour movies you can watch back to back to back to back to back to back. And as I sat there, I felt this growing longing in me. And it was a longing for home. I'd spent so much time with unfamiliar people in unfamiliar places doing unfamiliar things. I just felt this desire to be home. I felt this desire to see my wife and my daughter. And so the flight progressed. We landed at O'Hare, and I went through security and customs and came out the door, and there they were. They were waiting for me. And I just walked up to them, and I just collapsed in their arms. Coming home feels different depending on what you're coming home from. I don't often collapse into my wife's arms when I come home from Schnucks. Woodman's maybe, but not Schnucks. Just depends on where you're coming home from. Because we got in the same car at the airport that I was driven to the airport in. We went to the same house that I'd left 2 weeks before. I put on the same clothes I'd always put on. What was different? Well, what was different was what I was coming home from. One of the reasons I love the Bible is that we have so much more in common with the people in the Bible than we think. There's a book we've been talking about in this series called Isaiah. And Isaiah is a prophet. And a prophet's just a person that God has says, I need you to go tell people things that they need to know. I need to pass a message on to them. And Isaiah came to these people who had a very special partnership with God. And in that special partnership, there were 4 things that God promised them. He promised them, number 1, a temple. He promised them a place where he would live and they could connect with him. He promised them teaching. I'm going to teach you how to live the way I built you to live. He promised them a territory, a place, literal dirt that they could build their homes on, literal ground that they could live on. And he promised them a tribe. You will be together. You will be a family. You will support each other and connect with each other, and you'll go through this life together. But as often happens, and I don't know if you hear that and you listen to that and you think, that's what home really sounds like. It's a place where we connect with what matters most. It's a place where we learn how to live or how not to live, some of our homes. It's a place where we have a tribe of people we connect to. It's a place that we call our own. It's our own little piece of dirt in the world. And as often happens, as Isaiah watched the people of Israel, they began to see other gods who had cooler stuff. And they said, we'd like to go do that. We'd like to go be with those people. And slowly they started to turn their heads and started to think about leaving home. And so the whole first half of the book of Isaiah in the Bible is God saying, Isaiah, tell them, if they leave, they'll be vulnerable. If they leave, they will be out of my protection. If they leave, bad things could happen. And they did. They left behind his teaching. They were kidnapped by another nation and deported to another country. And they lost their temple. And they lost their territory because they left behind the teaching. And they still had the tribe, but they were scattered everywhere and they were just loosely connected. I think at Christmas we start thinking about the fact that everything would be better if we could all just go home. Everything would be better if we could just find our way home. Maybe some of you have family that are scattered all over the country or all over the state. And you're sitting there thinking, man, Christmas would be great if we could just get everybody home. If we could just get the kids, okay, maybe not the kids. If we could get the grandkids home, that would be great. Some of us this year are thinking, if we could just build the family, if I could just find that person and have my 2.5 kids and my dream of my home and the job if I could just have that, everything would be better. Some of us are saying, if I could just find a home where there's no abuse, where there's no backstabbing, where people pay attention to my presence and acknowledge that I'm there, everything would be fine. we all have this longing for home, because home is where we find the true depths of what love really is. And I know that sounds like a Lifetime movie event or something. Ooh, love. But the kind of love that Isaiah talks about, the kind of love that he says is at home, is a different kind of love. It's a covenant love. It's bigger. It's grittier. It's more powerful. It talks about it in Daniel like this. It says, Lord, great and awesome God, keeping covenant and steadfast love with those who love you and keep your commandments. Covenant love says, I, God, am in it for your good, and you are invited to be in it for mine. I do for you what you want done for me, and we go back and forth. We're in partnership. This is what home should look like. We live with a bunch of people who, no matter what, even when it's hard, are in it for our good, and we're in it for theirs. Which is something we have to choose to do, because it's not automatic. Because the reality is, we all live with weird people. It's true. If you look around your family and you're like, well, my family's not weird, you know what that means? That means you're the weird person. And if you don't believe me, all you have to do is look at some families' Christmas cards to know that this is true, like this family. Come on, really? Merry Christmas from Miami Vice. Or maybe this one. Playing the part of Jesus this year is Scruffy. It's his big role. Or this one's my favorite because it's silly and I'm silly. Can you just take a look at that for a second? Don't we all remember the moment we asked Dad to go get the plunger and stand in front of the tree? People are weird. People are goofy. Our homes are filled with weird and goofy people, but they're our weird and goofy people, and we want to be with them. That's because home is something powerful. For the people in the book of Isaiah, they were waiting for God to come and bring them home. For the people in the time when Jesus was born, they were waiting for God to come and bring them home. For us today, in this Christmas season, a lot of us are waiting for God to come and bring us home. Because our longing for home is deep down really just our longing for God. And so Isaiah tells the people in this Christmas season, here's what home is all about. And here's why you want it so much. There's some things we learn from him, and here's what we learn. Number one, we learn that home is a place that brings comfort. Home is a place that brings comfort. Isaiah, this book, has more prophecies about Jesus than any other book in the Old Testament. And so after this whole thing happens where they turn their back and they've been deported, they start a new chapter. Isaiah chapter 40 is a brand new chapter in the story. And it begins very differently. It begins with comfort. It says, "Comfort, O comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem, their capital. Cry to her." Cry to her. God says, look, things have been bad in the past. You've gone to a place you didn't want to go. You're in a spot in life where you don't know how you got there. Let me speak some comfort to you right now. And that comfort is part of who God is. Comfort is part of God's character. And there's no season that's better for us to realize that than Christmas. Because Christmas is the story of God coming to comfort his people. Even though everything had pretty much gone upside down and sideways, instead of commanding and demanding and yelling, God puts his mind to arriving and comforting. When that baby arrived in a manger on that quiet night in Bethlehem, it was the moment where God says, I have come to comfort my people. People who are lost, people who are far from home. And comfort does not mean everything's going to be fine. Far from it. But what it does mean is that comfort says that when God comes and builds a home with us, it means that we can be okay when everything isn't okay. The baby in the manger did not come and immediately fix everyone's problems. What he did was said, if you come to me, if you make your home with me, you can be okay even when things are not okay. And the Bible continues to bear witness to this. The psalmist says, now let your unfailing love comfort me, just as you promised me, your servant. God's comfort comes to us either in our hearts or in the journey that we take throughout this world, or even inside of these walls. Because one of the things we know about this place is we've all come and we all need a variety of different kinds of home. Maybe we've been blown apart by this last year. Maybe we've had some really difficult things happen. Maybe there have been people who were here last Christmas who are not here this Christmas, and there's a gap, and we just want to know that we're not alone in the grief that we feel. Some of us are just tired. Can anybody else? I'm just tired. It's not because things have gone completely, it's not that life is completely falling apart. It's just we're exhausted. And God says, I'm coming to comfort you, to bring you a home where you can rest with me. And he says this through Paul, and I love this verse in 2 Corinthians. He says, God is our merciful Father and the source of all of our comfort. He comforts us in all our troubles so that we can comfort others. When they are troubled, we will be able to give them the same comfort that God has given us. This is why we're here. This is why Jesus came at Christmas. This verse reminds me, I was asked early on as a pastor to do a funeral for a 29-year-old guy who died in a motorcycle accident. And I knew his family. His wife had recently just gotten clean from meth, and they had paid off a bunch of debt that had accrued over the years, and they were going in an incredibly healthy direction. And he was riding his bike one night on a country road, and he made a bad decision to try and pass the car in front of him, and he pulled out into oncoming traffic, and he died instantly. And so when I was invited into that room, I knew I wasn't there to make everything better. I wasn't there to make everything okay. Because when you're doing a funeral for a 29-year-old guy whose life is finally taking the turn that it needed to take, who dies suddenly, you're not there to make it okay. What I did instead was I quoted this verse from Paul that says, the God of all comfort is here. Because Jesus came, because he cares for us, because he loves us, he's here. And so let's grieve together, let's cry together, let's ask why together. And what happened in that funeral parlor was so strange. A bunch of people who may have never met each other, a bunch of people who didn't know who each other were and maybe didn't even like each other, suddenly turned towards each other. And they began to embrace each other, began to cry on each other's shoulders, and there were tissues and mucus and all that stuff that happens. And they began to collect together. And you know what they created? Home. A place where comfort began to come. And that's the story of Christmas. Jesus came so that moments like that can happen no matter where we are. So what do you need comfort for today? What is it in your life today? Maybe you just need a place to rest. Maybe you need somebody to come alongside you and say, this pain that you're feeling, you're not alone. If that's the case, then a starry night in Bethlehem, a baby came to say, God is coming to comfort his people. He's going to show up and build a home for you, a place where you can find comfort with him. Second thing we find out from Isaiah is this, is that home is consistent. Home is consistent. Isaiah says this in chapter 40, verse 6, all people, I love this, all people are like grass. Their constancy is like the flower of the field. I don't know how you like being compared to grass or flowers, but that's who we are. Because seasons come and the sun gets hot and we burn out. We fail, we bail, we do it halfway. We are inconsistent. But what I love about the message here is then he flips it and he says this in 40 verse 8. The grass withers and the flower fades, but the word of our God will stand forever. Home is a place where we know God will not drop the ball. And that phrase there, word of our God, a lot of people think he's referring to the Bible there. He's not. He's talking about the message of Isaiah that the God of comfort is coming. The God of comfort is coming. I'm coming, God says, to build a home with you, and I will not drop the ball. Ever. And I know for some of us, our homes are inconsistent places. We don't know what we're going to go home to. We don't know when we're going to walk in the house, which dad, which mom, which son, which daughter, which spouse is going to show up. We don't know if people are going to even recognize that we're there. We don't know that. And what God says is, hey, listen, when your house is a mess, my home is consistent. So come and live with me. Let me comfort you in this situation. And more than that, he shows us at Christmas that he is invested all the way. See, when that baby's born in the manger, you know what it is? It's God pushing all his chips into the center of the table. It's God saying, there is no plan B here. I am coming to comfort my people. I am consistent. I will not drop the ball, and I am all in. I am all in, no matter what it takes. I have two friends, Paul and Holly, who decided to adopt 2 kids from Haiti. And the fun thing about them is they already had triplet girls and a little boy. Anyway, so they decide to adopt these 2 kids, and so they make multiple trips, and they fall in love with this little girl and this little boy, and they decide to bring them into their family. And I don't know if you know anything about international adoption, but it's extremely expensive and extremely time-consuming. They spent tens of thousands of dollars to make this process go. They filled out numbers of paperwork, killed whole forests of paperwork. And then it came down to one moment that said, at some point, you're going to get a phone call. And as soon as you get that phone call, you buy a plane ticket, you come here, you live in Haiti for 2 weeks, and then you can take them back home. And so they waited for months. I don't know about you. Can you put your whole life on hold for 2 weeks? They waited, and they waited, and they waited. They gave up opportunities. They waited. The phone call came. They bought the plane ticket. They went to Haiti. They lived for 2 weeks. They brought the 2 kids home. Why would you do something like that? Because they were invested. They were invested in giving people, these 2 young kids, a home that was consistent and comforting and cared for. You see, when the Bible talks about Jesus coming into the world, it says this. It says that even though he was God, he didn't think of equality with God as something to cling to. Instead, he gave up his divine privileges. He took the humble position of a slave and was born as a human being. Paul and Holly put all their chips in the center. God, through Jesus, put all his chips in the center and said, I'm not going to drop the ball. I'm going to come as a baby in a manger to rescue, to bring my people home, because home is what matters most. And I want to challenge you, if you have a family right now, and you're a leader, husband or a single mom, single dad, whatever, we actually can model this if we're willing to. Statistics have said, and sociological studies have said, that families that have frequent dinners together, you know that, right? You get a chair and a table, and you guys all sit down, and you take your phones, you put them over here. Families that have frequent meals together have a lower rate of crime, depression, and violence among their children. So maybe one way you can imitate this God who is consistent is through the next few weeks, just pick one meal a day that you're going to sit down and turn off the phones and be together and be consistent. It doesn't matter what you eat. It doesn't have to be something from like Better Homes and Gardens. It can be Portillo's out of a bag. It doesn't matter. What matters is that it's consistent, and you build this place, this home that looks like the home that God is trying to build with all of us at Christmas. Home is a place where we find comfort. Home is a place that's consistent. But last but not least is this. Home is a place where God cares for us, where God specifically cares for us. So Isaiah finishes by saying this. It says, he will feed his flock like a shepherd. He will gather the lambs in his arms, and he will carry them in his bosom near his chest, and gently lead the mother sheep. I love this picture of the shepherd coming. Because I don't know if there are any shepherds in here today. Maybe there are. But sheep are interesting because sheep, number one, are not terribly bright. They're not the smartest animals on earth. And the other thing is they are helpless, completely helpless on their own. So a sheep would actually wander through the field and find 2 rocks that are side by side and walk into the middle of it. And even though they could walk through or over the edges, they, for whatever reason, get paralyzed and they go, whoa, okay, I'm stuck. I guess this is it. And literally, sheep would stay in between those rocks and starve to death. Even though they could have walked out any of one direction, they just were paralyzed by the circumstances. Gosh, that sounds familiar. We end up in situations in life and we're in the middle of it and we're like, okay, I guess this is it. But see, that's the moment. That's the moment when the shepherd comes. And he scoops up the sheep and carries him home. Because he can't just go, come here, sheep, because the sheep would go, bah. It would just stay there. The shepherd comes and he scoops up the sheep and he carries him home. Why? Because the shepherd knows where home is. The shepherd knows where what he needs is. The shepherd knows where the food and the water and the flock is, and he picks him up and he carries him home. That's the story of Christmas, is the shepherd God who brings comfort to his people, coming into a dark night and saying, if you're stuck between the rocks, I'm coming to carry you home. I'm coming to carry you home. It reminds me of a story. It's an old story, and it's probably not true, but we'll still talk about it. It's the story of this queen, this Greek queen. And she was on a journey, and she kept coming to these places where there were all kinds of mountains and valleys. And it just annoyed her because there were no roads through, no tunnels. You had to actually go up and around. It was a long, arduous thing. You had to go down through the valley. And she finally just had it, and she said, listen, I'm sending all of my servants to the kingdom to knock down all these mountains and fill up all these valleys and make a flat way through here. And so with extreme amounts of finances, she laid out this plan, and her subjects in the kingdom laid down all the mountains, filled up all the valleys so that she could walk across on flat, straight ground. And the story goes that from then on in history, no one would forget the queen who came through and leveled the mountains and filled up the valleys. Why that's interesting to me is Jesus is born, and before he comes into the world as an adult to begin to teach us what life is supposed to be like, there's a guy that comes before him, and his name is John the Baptist. I call him JTB. You can do that as well if you'd like. JTB shows up, and he begins to talk about this guy who is coming, this person, the Son of God, the Messiah, who is going to set the whole world right. And when he wants to talk about what that means, guess who he quotes from? Isaiah. Some 500 years before Isaiah had said this, and JTB shows up and he begins to quote from Isaiah, and he says, the voice of one is crying in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord. See if this sounds familiar. Make his path straight. Every valley shall be filled, every mountain and hill made low, and the crooked shall be made straight, and the rough ways made smooth, and all flesh shall see the coming salvation of God. JTB is saying that when Jesus comes, he's leaving a mark on the world. And that mark says God is filling valleys and flattening mountains so that you and I can come home. See, there's this debate about what we say this time of year. Some of us are like, it has to be Merry Christmas. Some of us are like, well, Happy Holidays is okay. I honestly don't care. And if that bothers you, just remember all complaints can go to josh.pay at... I don't care. You know why? Because what I would rather do is live as if Jesus had made a mark on my life and let people discover whatever phrase they want to use for that. Because the big deal is not what you say. The big deal is that we come home. Is that the baby in the manger left a mark on history, and we celebrate this season because he came regardless of what we say about it. The God of comfort has come. The consistent God who will never drop the ball with the chips all on the table has come. The shepherd God has come to care for us just in the ways that we need. So this season, are you longing for home? Are you longing for a place of care that is consistent, where you can be comforted, where you can be okay even if nothing's okay? If so, Jesus has an invitation for you, and he says this, live in me. Live in me, make your home in me, just as I do in you. I am coming, and I came as a baby in a manger to a man who died on a cross so that you and I can build a home together where you might be comforted, where you can be cared for, and where you can know God will never drop the ball, God will never leave you behind. That's what Christmas is all about, and that's what we're all waiting for. So a couple things. Maybe today you've wandered a bit. You realize this past year your faith has just struggled. It's okay. That happens. And you realize your faith has struggled and you want to find a way back, and you're just not sure how that's going to happen. I want to challenge you. We've got a couple weeks now until Christmas. I want to challenge you. There are these accounts of Jesus' birth in a book called Matthew in the Bible and a book called Luke. They're both at the beginning. I want to challenge you in the next 2 weeks, read those accounts as many times as you possibly can. Because what happens is we start to remember the reason why we got into this thing in the first place. Sometimes it's not that our faith is dying. Sometimes it's just we've forgotten how to get back home. And so let these stories be the GPS that guides you back to the reason you did this in the first place. Or maybe you're here, like Gordy said, and you don't know why. You lost a bet with God, or somebody bribed you with food, which is very effective, by the way. And you're like, listen, God kicked me out of the house a long time ago. He doesn't want me back. That is patently false. And you know why I know that? Because Christmas happened. Because God came. Instead of yelling and demanding and commanding, God came and said, I'm not kicking you out of the house. I'm building a home here for you to come to. So if you're here today and you're like, I'm not sure I belong, let me challenge you. We've got a couple weeks until Christmas. Maybe make a commitment right now to be here for the next 2 weeks. And just see if maybe there is a home here with God for you. And I believe you'll find that there is. The other thing I know is that for some of us, this season is painful because we're reminded of gaps in our family, in our friendships, places where relationships have just been busted up and are strained. Maybe this Christmas is the time when God is challenging you to start the process of forgiving that person who's wounded you. And that is a lifelong thing, depending on the depth of the hurt that you've experienced. But I want you to know there are people on our team that would love to walk you through that. Pastors who would love to help you figure out, how do I start the process of forgiving that person who wounded me? And there will also be people up here up front when we're done who would love to pray for you and with you. If that's something you feel like this year, what's keeping me from home is that there's this hurt, and I need to start doing something with it. The God of all comfort says, I can take you through this. It may not be okay, but you can be okay as we go through this process. So the question that I have for you is, do you want to come home? This is the season. Let's stand as we pray together. God, I want to thank you because you made this opportunity available to us. I want to thank you that you are a God of comfort. That through that baby in the manger, we realize you have come to us in the time when we needed you the most. When things are upside down and sideways and we feel like everything is on fire, you came and said, even when things are not okay, my comfort to you is that you can be okay. That you are a God who does not drop the ball. That you put everything you had in to Jesus and said, there is no plan B. I will never fail you. I will love you no matter what. And I'm calling you to accept that today. Thank you for that. And thank you that you care for us each individually based on the things that we need, the things that bother us, that wound us, and that hurt us, that distance us from home. Thank you for being the shepherd who scoops us up when we are dumb and helpless and carries us home. Bless us now as we go into this season, as we wait for things that we know are coming. Give us the strength to be patient. And all this we pray in the name of Jesus. Amen.